This is the Harmon Cooper review extravaganza. I'll be reviewing the Feedback Loop 2 and 3, and I'll be reviewing his new book, Fantasy Online, Hyperborea. So starting off with the Feedback Loops 2 and 3, I've reviewed the first book previously, and most of the problems that I had with the first book sort of continue on into 2 and 3. The main one is that the bad guy in Harmon Cooper's stories doesn't seem to have a motive. Doesn't seem to really have a necessary conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist. And that usually hurts the book pretty horribly. So whenever a book starts off, there's something really nice that happens. The very first scene is great. The main character, Quantum Hughes, he starts off by getting the living crap kicked out of him, and he's trying to access his inventory screen, but now that he's in the real world, he's unable to. It's one of the few books I've seen where there's some sort of repercussion for being stuck inside of a virtual game for a long period of time. So think about it. If you're inside of a virtual game where getting hit actually hurts and where there's monsters jumping out all over from all different corners, there would probably be some sort of natural reaction to that. You would have PTSD, or you would twitch whenever you look around corners, or you would be jittery. There would be something that would happen psychologically. And yet in a lot of these books, playing a video game with painful deaths and where you're murdering people and where everything is shown in super gory graphic detail has absolutely no effect on the protagonist, and this really annoys me. So I'm glad that Harmon actually did that in this story. But there we have one of the problems with a lot of novels, and that is that the way things interact and the way the real world plays out tends to be a little bit strange. So he gets introduced to a police humanoid robot, and one of the side effects of Quantum Hughes being stuck inside of the feedback loop for, I think in the story it's actually 8.5 years, but he only remembers 2 years of that. The side effect of that is that he's constantly fighting with the police because he was stuck inside of this neo-noir thing where the cops were usually corrupt or incompetent or the other stereotypes from the film noir genre. So he gets to meet the robot, he picks a needless fight with the robot, and then the robot says, so basically you committed assault, and it's like, well, no. Even if you provoke a fight, if there are more than one attacker, then that is assault. Even if you provoke a fight, if you are continued to be assaulted at the point which you can't defend yourself, that's still assault and battery. So the cop doesn't make what is a pretty obvious look, which is a crippled guy, no matter what he says, if you attack him as a group and beat him when he is defenseless, you are guilty of a crime, not the other way around. So that's sort of the problem with some of these novels is the real world's that's not how the real world would play out there. Also, this is kind of another problem, and that is that you have to set up this world in any of these virtual worlds such that the real world would allow the virtual world to exist. And by that I mean that we know about this group, the Reavers, and we know that they murder people in real world, and we know that they kidnap people and force them to go insane. And it's okay, what sort of world would allow a group like the Reavers to exist? You need to set that up perfectly. You have to make me believe that this could happen. And in Harmon's world, the police are more like inside of a Demolition Man. And if you see Demolition Man, you know that it's actually 2 movies, one of which is a really interesting sci-fi movie, and the other one's a schlocky Sylvester Stallone action movie. And in it, the police and all the other people are like an evil Mr. Rogers, as the bad guy says, Wesley Snipes. And basically in that movie, the cops are like, oh, you need to make sure that you're not swearing. You need to make sure that you're thinking happy thoughts all the time and you're only listening to these happy songs, right? It's a super sanitized world. And that's sort of what that's what Harmon Cooper goes with Quantum Hughes. And the issue with that is a world in which we have this sort of super protective nanny state isn't the same world where you can go into a virtual game and murder people and steal their assets. These are 2 completely different worlds. And one way you could get away with that is you could have it be that the government is incredibly incompetent, right? Maybe there's 20 different branches of government that all do the same thing and they're just bumbling around, but he never sets that up. So the police situation and how the Reavers could exist in this world, that never is clearly explained. It's just kind of oh, it's really funny to have this world where every time you eat a burrito, it tells you how many calories it has and it sends you a warning about you need to watch your weight and how many calories you get, whereas Quantum Hughes goes off on some quasi-libertarian rants about how it's his body and he can do whatever he wants. And that's funny, but it's also incongruent with the story that he's trying to tell. So that's just like a thing you got to think about whenever you write these sorts of novels, is like, is the real world set up such that the fake world could exist? And if you want some examples for who does that really well, Travis Bagwell does it really well. I'm blanking on his name right now. Lancey Yazaris, James Hunter. James Hunter does it really well. So, like, you understand why the virtual world that he creates exists based upon the destruction of the real world. Books like that do a really good job. And then other books don't do such a good job. I was really mad at Way of the Shaman #5 because he sets up a lot of things in books 1 through 4. And then in #5, he's just like, well, whatever. Particularly in The Hour of Pain, he just throws away everything you wrote in all the previous books. And it's like, for example, it says that they're using this prisoner rehab program, right? And then it's like, oh, but if you stay in the game, your brain becomes fried, so he needs to log out. And it's like, well, which is it? Is it a prisoner rehab program, or is his brain going to get fried? In another scene, he has this love test, I guess, or whatever it is, the yin yang thing with the flowers that only bloom, or something only blooms whenever two lovers are together. And it's like, okay, you also have set up that the only reason why anything happens in this game is because there's a corporation. The corporation wants to get as much money as it possibly can, so it's basically charging players at every single turn. So there's nothing really special about Mahinko, the main character. The only thing special is that the game programmers decided to go on with this new scenario at the time whenever Mayhan is active in the world. So which is it? Is it that this computer knows that two people are truly, truly in love, or is it that this corporation is just trying to yank out money from players? You can't have both. And that's the common trap that a lot of people run into when they write these novels. And Harmon is running into it here as well, where he wants to both have a funny scene with the police, but also he wants to have this gritty neo-noir world where you can murder people in virtual worlds and nothing happens. So there's a bit of a contradiction there. Anyway, and I call this the two-world problem, where you have this incongruity between the real world and the fictional world. And it's very prevalent in lit RPGs. And Harmon has a really nice trick of getting around this problem, and basically he just makes his scenes really funny. He's a very, very funny writer. So anytime he wants to hand wave, he's going to make a scene that tries to distract you from what's going on beneath the covers. So here I'd like to talk a little bit more about how Harmon Cooper does humor, and some portions of my reviews that talk a lot about how the buddy cop formula works, which is you have one character who's the straight-laced character, then you have a side character who is the comic relief, and the reason why this setup is so common and why it works is because it creates a natural level of tension between the two characters, and where you can create tension between characters, you can create drama, and that gives both of them someone to play off of. The straight-laced guy can make jokes at the expense of the quirky character, and the quirky character make jokes at the expense of the main character. Now, that's sort of the amateurish way to write comedy. I don't want to say it's amateurish per se, because you can get some really good humor out of that sort of setup. But it is a simpler technique, and that's why it's so prevalent. A more complicated technique that Harmon Cooper actually uses, and so if you want to look at how to do really good layered comedy, is to have multiple characters who are humorous, but they have different types of humor. So I'm going to talk about Jason Cipriano's Kingdom of the Skull, I believe is the name of the series, that book series. And he has at least 3 characters who sort of have the same sense of humor. They all serve the same comedic role. And so because of that, they're constantly just like talking to each other in a way that seems very artificial and that doesn't generate a lot of humor because there's no tension between them. Humor is generated by tension, and that's why a lot of the funniest jokes tend to be sexist jokes or racist jokes or other jokes that are off color like that. And the reason why is because it just generates natural tension to have jokes about something that is inherently dangerous in a certain sense. It creates that tension. And that's why if you read a lot of comedians, they're talking about how they don't like to perform in colleges now because they can't tell funny jokes. They can't be offensive. Like, that's just part and parcel of their trade. So what Harmon Cooper does is he uses what I like to call the Friends setup. And if you see the show Friends, then you know that there are several characters, all of whom are funny, but they all have different senses of humor. So there are humorous situations that Joey will find himself in, who's basically a himbo character, that Chandler will not. Chandler is witty and sarcastic and intelligent, but he's not given to the same sorts of humor. Then there's the character of Fifi, and her character is a free spirit who doesn't know much about books or anything, and so she gets herself into certain situations that are humorous, along with Monica and all the others. And that's the advanced form of humor, is to have multiple different versions of humor so that certain characters for certain scenes can make a scene that might not be that funny become extremely funny. So that's how Harmon Cooper does comedy. And this is something he does really well. So if you want to read someone who does really well layered comedy, then the Feedback Loop series is an excellent showcase of how to do it properly. Anyway, so we learned that we learned that Quantum Hughes is and I keep getting the names of the author and the character mixed up. But Quantum Hughes, we learned that he's got a fish out of water problem. He's not really fitting into this new world. He's had most of his memory erased from the glitches inside the feedback loop, so he doesn't really know who he is or what sort of world he's in. So he's spending time inside of the game world, the one that he originally escaped from, the neo-noir world, and he's meeting with Dolly, who is she's the AI that basically controls the entire world. So he's spending time with her, but at the same time, he also has a budding relationship with Frances Euphoria, who is she's the love interest of the story. Quantum Hughes had rescued her from a proximal world, and now she's repaying the favor. In the end, the way that it works out is that there's a lot of scenes that in the book where I think that Harmon's going to get too reliant upon a technique, which is a problem a lot of authors fall into in the lit RPG genre. So basically he has this guy, Dirty Dave, and it looks like the way he's going to work around any problem is that, oh, Dirty Dave's going to build a super weapon. But as soon as he does that, he immediately undercuts it and destroys the world in which Dirty Dave lives. And his constant ability to recognize when he's setting up a problem and then undercut that problem, that's a strength a lot of writers don't have. But he has the ability to recognize, like, I'm making it way too easy for my protagonist, so now it's time to undercut that thing and make my protagonist come up with a new way of getting around problems. At the end of book 3, there's a big showdown between the main bad guy and Quantum Hughes. The main bad guy's name is Strata Godsick. And even at this big showdown, 3 books in, we don't really know much. We do know that there's this thing called RPCs, which is Reborn player characters. And basically that if you spend too long inside of these video games, you sort of get encoded into the system such that if you die in the real world, your virtual avatar, your RPC, will continue to exist and play inside the game, and that your RPC will have as much information about it as if you were really there. And we know that Strata Godsick's kid has died or been captured in one of these proximal worlds that they're trying to get to. But we don't really know much more beyond that. We know that Quantum and Strata were once buddies or partners, and that Strata turned to the dark side, but we don't know why he turned to the dark side. Like, why is it that murdering people and extorting them would be the way to go? Why would that be a better business model? You know, I mean, he has a literal 0% success rate as far as we know in the story. So it's like, why would anyone hire someone whose success rate is 0% and who all of his previous clients are either still in a coma, which are the people he captures and basically unleashes like these feral zombie people, or that he kills and then takes all their stuff. And it's like, that would not be legally binding. And it wouldn't take too much of a DA to look at this track record and be like, you know what, this seems really sketchy. Particularly because everywhere they go, like the NPCs, as soon as they enter any of the proximal worlds, the NPCs are like, the Reavers are here. If they shoot you, you die in real world. Don't let them capture you. It's like, well, if everyone, literally, and all the players know this too, right? Because as soon as Quantum Hughes appears and like he's wearing the Reaver mask that he got in the first book, everyone's like, oh, and he's a Reaver, he's a player killer, he's going to kill you in real world. And it's like, wait a minute. If like literally everyone knows that the Reavers kill people in the real world, like why would anyone hire them and why are they allowed to operate, right? You can't run a literal killing business and like be well known, right? Like you don't see Hitman under H in the phone book or, you know, on a Google search. You can't just go get you one of those, right? So that's like one of the big issues that I have with it. But overall, the book is very funny. It's tightly paced. Everything sort of happens in a way that flows very naturally, which is sort of one of my issues. In a lot of lit RPG books, they use the quest mechanism, like, oh, I got a quest, I got to go do the questy thing. And it's like, yeah, but that feels artificial, you know. If you're going to use quest, it should flow very naturally, just as if, like, you should be able to remove the quest and not have the book change. Like, it should just be what they're doing anyway. But in a lot of books, they use quests as like, oh, I got 100 pages I need to fill up, so I'm going to have a quest here. He doesn't do that, but his books are, because they're so well edited and they're so tightly paced, they're a lot shorter than a lot of little RPG books are out there. So if like you just want page count, then Harmon Cooper's not an author to read. But if you're looking for a really well-paced novel that's very, very funny, and it does think through the consequences of like having a guy trapped in a world for however many years, then it's a pretty good book. I'd rate it 4.5. It still has the villain problem, and it still has the two world problem where I don't buy into the real world and some of the issues that it goes for, but it has some really good plot twist. I will say that between book 2 and 3, you should read them as one unit, because book 2 just kind of ends. And I was like, what? And the reason why is because book 3 just basically picks up where it left off. Also, he's a cliffhanger writer, so he likes to end things like after a big scene that sets up the next book. So like if you're someone who wants like the entire book just to be a standalone book, he's not that sort of author either. He always keeps it hidden for what he's going to do next, or sets up the seed that something big's going to happen. The book is self-contained, but there is the seed set up of like, okay, there's going to be something else that happens. So he doesn't end on a literal cliffhanger, but he does end it so you're like, well, what does happen next? So overall, 4.5, pretty good series. Well, very good series, actually. And books 2 and 3 are pretty good, but a few problems he needs to work out of there. And that takes me to Hyperborea. Let me look at that name again. Fantasia Online, Hyperborea. This book, so it suffers. So Quantum Hughes is like a character, and he's fairly memorable. He's very witty, and he likes to use long words and verbose statements and obscure references. So in Hyperborea Online, Fantasy Online, I need to find an acronym for it, so I'm going to call it Hyper. So in the Hyper novel, the main character is a high schooler or freshly graduated from high school. The book doesn't really specify his exact age too well, but you do know it's a very young man who has the ability to exit and go out into the real world. He is the son of a Yakuza boss. And as far as the story goes, it seems to indicate that his father died or was murdered or something happened. The dad's out of the picture. The mom is now running the Yakuza behind the scenes, but she never appears in the novel, so she's just like hinted at. The older brother is the one who's actually running the Yakuza family. And it does go a bit into sort of what sort of person he is, but unfortunately it never goes into what sort of problems he has. Like, why is he in conflict with the main character? What are they fighting over exactly? Which is also true of the previous book in the series, the original Quantum Hughes series. So this book takes place after the Quantum Hughes things are going out, because Quantum Hughes is kind of like a legendary figure in this. So is Dirty Dave and some of the other characters from the Feedback Loop series. They're all sort of spoken of as legendary characters. And we find out that the main character, he is a resetter, which means he played this video game for a while. He got his character to a really high level, and then he decided to create a brand new one and become a resetter, which comes with certain like little perks and also some downsides of having to become a reset player. He gets attacked in the real world by some of the game world characters. Because of this, I don't want to call her his girlfriend, but basically his best friend that he's never had sex with or done anything with, she also gets attacked by one of the NPCs from the video game. And she runs in front of a train, jumps, and she doesn't time her jump correctly. She gets hit by the train, and it's all over the news. This young Japanese girl committing suicide, and he figures out that it's because she was also attacked by NPCs in the video game. And this is kind of like the first problem. So we do, and to speak about this scene, one of the things that Harmon Cooper does really well here is that he does not dwell on this. Like, he doesn't like try to make us feel bad for the main character. Some writers do that, where a character will obsess over something for like 40 or 50 pages. And we're like, as the readers, we're like, we don't care about that thing. I reviewed this in Final Fantasy 15, that like it's like trying to make you care about one of your friend's sisters, and it tries to make you care about this relationship that your main character has with this princess. And you're like, I don't care at all. From the perspective of the story, yeah, I understand that maybe this guy would care, but as far as me, the player, I haven't seen these characters, I haven't interacted with them, and I haven't done anything with them, so why do I care? And Harmon Cooper understands that, so he doesn't try to like force you to care about it. He's like, yeah, the main character's upset, but you, the reader, I understand you aren't going to care so much about it. And that's really nice to see in a novel. So from there, he logs into the game. It's sort of like our first thing. Like, okay, if a game attacked you in the real world, why would you keep playing it? Like, wouldn't you like try to alert somebody or try to do something? And he comes with this plan of like, he's going to talk to the NBA Seed, which is the AI that sort of rules this, and talk to them about it. And it's like, I don't know, this seems kind of convoluted, you know, and also it seems really selfish. Like, you know that there's this thing that's attacking people and you're not going to do anything about it or try to alert the authorities or get some sort of investigation going here. That's really weird for an 18-year-old. As his first like response being like, I'm going to become a hero. And his motivations throughout the novel, outside from like the obvious one of like, oh, his friend died, are really suspect. Worse than him, though, his older brother who runs the Yakuza, he keeps picking fights with the younger brother, and you're like, why? Because there's no conflict between them, like literally none. It's like, okay, so the older brother's running the family. The younger brother has no interest in running the family. So it's like, okay, you could have set this up such that the younger brother is like, no, we're not going to be a crime family anymore. We're going to go legit. And the older brother could be like, no, we're a crime family. And there could be that sort of a tension, but that doesn't exist. You could also make it that the older brother, we know that he went to college for a brief period in the United States. And you could make it that like the younger brother had to take over the family for a little brief period, and that like that was fondly remembered by the henchmen because you learn that the older brother is very violent and he's mentally unstable. So it could be like, okay, the younger brother ran the family for a while and he's really good at it. And so everyone's like, oh, I really wish the younger brother would take over the family, but he never does, right? And the older brother could be jealous of that, and that would be a motivation. But then that happens. It's like the younger brother's just like, I want to play video games. That's it. That's his character. That's as far as that goes. There's nothing else underneath the covers. So he has no motivation, and he doesn't really have a personality. He's what I like to call the vanilla wafer good guy. So it's like, yeah, he's good. Okay, but what else? And the way you learn about a character and the way that you set up their moral dimensions is usually by how they react in the face of adversity through the antagonist. So you have the antagonist, which is all the forces arrayed against your main character. And the way that your character chooses to handle those problems, that shows you what sort of person they are. So, for example, if they choose to lie, cheat, and steal their way through problems, then that's one sort of character, right? If you got a fast-talking sort of anti-hero character, then that's one person. If you have a much more straight-laced, do-right sort of character who tries to do everything in the most moral way possible, then you have another character. But your dimensions of your character are always set up by this conflict, and it's like there's not a conflict here. I don't understand why these two have a problem. Like, younger brother's like, I don't want to run the family. The older brother's like, I want to run the family. It's like, there's nothing there. So it's basically like the older brother just bullying the younger brother around for absolutely no reason. So we learned the younger brother does have one thing special. He has a human droid, the only one of its kind, that basically watches out for him. It's like his protector bodyguard. It is a little bit weird that the younger brother gets this protector droid and the older brother just gets a generic model, but that's how it's set up. And that's fine. And that's sort of the problem, is that this human android has more personality than the main character. And like, that's never a good sign. Like, you always want your main character to be the focus of the story. You don't want your main character to like get relegated behind the side characters. Anyway, so the younger brother enters into the video game world, Hyperborea, and he talks to him and the girl started a guild, even though like they're the only two people in it. And he learns that her RPC was reborn in the game, so she died in the real world, but her RPC came into the game, and then it has a whole bunch of information that is particular to her, so the RPCs do know lots of personal information that gets encoded into the game as well, and he wants to find her, but as soon as she logged into the game, she was immediately kidnapped, and the goblin that was their guild NPC, he was taking a gob nap, and he got stabbed, so he's just basically there bleeding until the main character heals him up, and then they go on a quest to go like find her RPC character. They meet a streamer, a Twitch streamer who's really funny. Basically, his whole job in that is to constantly like advertise products the entire time. And I thought that scene was done really well of like, what would it be like in a virtual world? It'd sort of be like the Truman Show, the Jim Carrey movie, where constantly characters have to like advertise things all the time while things are going on live. And that's constantly what he's doing it throughout the thing, trying to make a buck. There is like a plot hole with that. And that is basically like, it gets brought up, but it like, the game, it just kind of does some hand waving around the problem. But basically, like, okay, so if you're being followed by a guy who's constantly Twitch streaming everything you're doing, they don't call it Twitch, it's something else, but who's constantly streaming everything you're doing, like, why wouldn't the people who you're going up against, why wouldn't they just follow the channel and do what happened in Awaken Online, where they in Awaken Online, the bad guy Jason is Jason the good guy or the bad guy? Anyway, the bad guy in it is constantly Twitch streaming and talking about what he's going to do. So he crosses over from the light into the dark, and immediately the main character sets up an ambush. So as soon as he crosses over, he gets attacked in the night, and then he harries him the entire time whenever he's going forward. And it's like, yeah, why wouldn't that happen? Basically, if you're saying, like, here's my mission, I'm gonna take out this group of these guild people who kidnapped my RPC friend. And it's like, yeah, well, seems like they would be following them. So anyway, it gets set up that there's going to be the guild that stole the girl. There's going to be a guild-on-guild showdown, and the guild consists of the main character, his goblin, and the Twitch streamer, all of whom are extremely low level. And so at first it's like, oh, we're going to level up. And then they're like, no, that's a terrible idea because the human droid leaves out these little Zen coins, Koane, which are basically these little sayings that people in Buddhism use, and you meditate upon them. And thus, by meditating upon them, you achieve enlightenment where you understand the deeper meaning of it. So some of them are easy to understand, some of them are very nonsensical, and you're supposed to meditate upon it until the nonsensical ones make sense. And basically tells him to emphasize the difference, and he figures out that the difference between his guild and the other guild is that the other guild's strong, he's weak, so he needs to resort to ambush tactics, so he kidnaps the RPC player girl. And this sort of creates one of the other problems of the novel, and that is that he does try to tie these two worlds together, like what's going on in the outside world and what's going on in the inside world. And again, Awaken Online really nails this in terms of, like, everything feels pretty natural between the conflicts in the outside world and the inside world, or the virtual world. But here he's like trying to tie them together, and it's like very shoestringy, like it doesn't work. Mostly because the bad guy has no motivation, which of course the bad guy's just his older brother. But it's trying to like tie these things together, and they don't really tie together very well. So it's very shoestringy feeling whenever it comes to those sort of plot threads. Anywho, they rescue the girl, get her back. And now the main character's like, oh yeah, by the way, I've been a wuss this whole time. I should have asked you out. You know, you're the one for me. And she's like, I'm an RPC. Like, what are you talking about? So we get that little moment. And then finally, something happens. Yeah, there's some hand waving here with quests. And that was where in the original one I said I don't like having quests as a plot generator. Like, you can use quests, but if that becomes your plot, it's just like, oh, or yeah, there's this quest over here. Go do that thing. Then that becomes an issue. So now I'd like to talk about what I consider to be one of the most problematic sequences of the book. The scene is that they go to a bar, and the goblin sort of becomes the main character. Now, the reason this was done is because the goblin is more interesting than the protagonist. And if you ever find yourself writing and you want to make a side character into the protagonist, that is generally a sign that you have way too weak of a lead. And the reason why we have a weak lead is because we have not revealed that character's moral dimensions yet in the story. And the scene sort of highlights it. So the scene starts off with them going to a bar, and the goblin says, let me do all the work. And the goblin starts torturing one of the bar patrons in front of everybody, including the local cops, and no one stops him. This is kind of already a problem because, you know, if you go into a bar and you start picking a fight or torturing people, someone's going to get upset. At the very least, the bar owners are going to have words with you because they're going to kick you out of their establishment and call the cops. So already this is setting up a sort of a suspension of disbelief or a break from the rules. So already we have a problem with this scene setup, both with the goblin being the main character for this scene and for how the rules of this scene are working. So the goblin tortures the dude, and the basic reason for his torturing him is he asked the bar patron to name the seediest bar that exists. And it's like, wait, what? You're torturing a guy to ask him questions he would freely give the answer to with no problem and with no provocation. So it's not like he tried asking nicely first and then he resorted to torture. Now, this would be a great scene to have the main character reflect upon his brother, who we've seen torture and murder people earlier in the book, and to have him say, wait a minute, whoa, we're going to emphasize the differences here, which is a key term that comes up again and again in the novel. And the difference between me and my brother is that I have moral limits. I'm not going to just torture random people in the hopes they're going to give me information. That never happens, though. The main character never objects to the torture. Only one of the side characters does. And I think the only thing the main character says is that he doesn't want the guild to become known as a place where people get tortured. So we don't really have a difference between the main character and the bad guy. There's no moral dimension between the two of them because he's clearly willing to let people be tortured and to let the underlings underneath him torture people. So then they get the name of this next bar. They go there, and the only thing this sets up is a drinking game where suddenly the person who passes out or fails to complete a series of boasts, that person has to pay for all the drinks. And the goblin sets this up because he says, okay, I'm going to get someone really completely hammered, and they're going to tell me all about the evil guild and what's going on with that. So the first thing is that none of these events have a necessary connection to them. The more necessary things are between a sequence of events, the stronger the story is going to feel. The more unrelated or coincidental the series of actions are that get you to a place, the more force it's going to feel, the more unnatural it's going to feel. And that's what happens in this whole sequence of events. It feels very unnatural. And the only reason set up for the drinking game is so that the main characters, the group, the guild, can get drunk and one of the girls can have a heart-to-heart talk with the main character. So this scene is problematic for numerous reasons. One, the main quest, the whole reason for the book to rescue the RPC, that's been completed. We now have that girl. But then now we're having all this stuff being done just so that way we can get some exposition in, because the characters wouldn't naturally have this exposition. So now we have yet another problem in the series, that these characters aren't quite connected to each other in a way that feels natural, so we have to invent some sort of artificial mechanism to get them going. And then we have the problem that the goblin has taken over as the lead character because the main character just isn't very interesting. So that whole sequence, and this is all set up so that they can have the big showdown at the end and have the plot twist reveal. But this whole sequence, to me, highlights all the problems of the novel. Just a couple of pages to get this whole thing done. But it highlights the weakness of the protagonist, the lack of distinction between what the bad guy wants and what the good guy wants, and the fact that the two of them aren't really different in a way that's really meaningful. The only main difference is that the younger brother seems to be completely unambitious, whereas the big brother, though evil, has some sorts of ambitions. And so this sets up a huge number of problems for the novel. So basically they decide after kidnapping her, now what we're going to do is we're going to raid that guild base. We're going to go in for a full-on assault and kill everyone. And there's some issues there because they try to sneak in, and whenever they, as sanitation workers, and whenever they do, they're immediately figured out, but the guy who figures them out tries to poison them with tea instead of calling for backup immediately. It's I don't know. Those sorts of what the fuck moments are I don't know. I don't know how to feel about those sorts of things. Anywho, their big planned raid goes awry, and then that gives us our plot twist for the novel, where it ties together some of the things that happen in the beginning and some of the things that happen in the end. But the main bad guy has no real motivation for what he's doing. It doesn't explain anything well around the main character. He doesn't really have a personality. So you've got these two forces. It does spend a lot of time talking about the bad guy and saying he's, he kills people and he's very casual about his violence. We know that he's got some sexual hangups because he doesn't have sex with women. He just masturbates while he watches them. So it goes into those sorts of details, but it doesn't go into the main detail, which is okay, why is the bad guy against the good guy? What thing do they want? It has to be something they both want. That is impossible for both of them to achieve, right? So if you think about the archetypical example, it's the Dark Knight, Joker and Batman, right? Joker believes that society is just a thin veneer over chaos, and he wants to rip that away and show the world for what it's really worth, whereas Batman believes that people are inherently good and that chaos is actually the artifice being imposed upon, and then he can save Gotham. So they're fighting over something that neither one of them can achieve at the same time, right? It's an impossible conflict. Then you think about Batman v Superman, where it's I don't like you, Batman. Why? The plot says so. And it's so bad. And that's sort of what's going on here is I don't know why, the main bad guy, he's like, he wants the little brother to go to college, but why? Like, what's going to happen when he goes to college? Like what's the point of that? Right? It's like, I want you to go to college. And it's like, that's the conflict that doesn't go anywhere. Like, who cares? What is he going to become a better Yakuza leader if he goes to college? Then the conflict is that he wants to become a Yakuza leader instead of playing video games. But then you find out the brother plays video games. And you're like, wait, what? Like, where is this conflict coming from? What is the irreducible difference between these two brothers? And the only thing it seems to be is like the big brother's a jerk, and like that's the plot. And it's like, that does not work. So overall, this book, it's still very funny. The Goblin has a lot of crude humor. There is a lot of fart jokes in it, like a huge amount. And you learn all the different ways you can say fart with nouns and adverbs and different descriptors. So it is funny. The Twitch streaming guy is fairly funny. There is a pretty good balance in terms of like, I know why the main character is kind of dour, and that's because you want to have a character to offset the more crazy character. So you generally want a more relaxed character. Otherwise, you end up with the problem that Jason Cipriano had in his book series, his Litrpgreviews series, where you had like 3 or 4 characters who are all trying to be comic relief, and you're like, well, one of you has to actually be serious and drive the plot forward. You can't have 4 people like trying to jockey for jokes. That just doesn't work. So he made the main character the most dour one of them, and that's kind of like because he's kind of a wet blanket most of the time whenever he's in a scene. Like, none of his scenes really stand out. So you have poor motivation from the bad guy. You have very bad logic from the main character as far as like what his plan is and how he's going to go about achieving things. So this series is not as good as the Feedback Loop series. It's more closer to what I would call a 4-star, and if you know my rating, a 4-star is actually a 4-star, meaning like I don't give these super inflated reviews. It is tightly structured still. It is funny, but there is a little too much leaning on like, oh, there's going to be a quest, and there's too many like fuzzy logic things where it's like, we need something to happen here, so we're going to do this thing to make things happen. And it doesn't feel like it flowed naturally from the story progression. You just feel like he needed something to happen so he could have a scene set up, but the scene didn't flow naturally from the story. It's just something he kind of like wrote in there. So overall, 4 stories, 4.5 stories for the original series, for the Feedback Loop series, books 2 and 3. These books were all narrated by Jeff Hayes, and generally I get my books on audiobook because I work 2 jobs, so I don't have a lot of free time, so I just listen to them whenever I can. So I'm also a little fuzzy on certain details because it was a couple of weeks ago I listened to the Feedback Loop 2 and 3. But overall, very good series. I'm going to continue listening and reading the series, and I hope he comes out with more, but I do hope he fixes this problem he has with writing bad guys who have relatable goals and who are in necessary conflict with the protagonist of the story.